All right. Well, I think it's been long enough. I'm just going to chat for a minute about this and then I'll start taking questions. And I've also got some questions that people sent in anonymously that I'll try to answer. Um, so, this whole thing comes from something that I get a lot of, that I think a lot of other professionals get a lot of, which is emails from sound folks asking for advice, asking for portfolio reviews, asking questions, and we sometimes get a lot of the same questions, but also I don't know if it's just me, but I kind of suck at keeping up with answering them. I mean well, and I want to answer all these questions that I get via email and via Twitter message, LinkedIn message, Facebook message. There's so many sites that people send questions via. I want to answer them, but I suck at keeping up with them. And it's partially because of work and partially because of children and all of that. So I thought, hey, my son goes to office hours for his math class to get help with stuff. Why don't I just kind of do a similar thing and say, hey, I'm going to be available once a week or once every other week, and I'll just answer whatever questions people have for the hour that I'm available. And like I was saying a little while ago, that if this proves to be useful and people like it, then I've already had a few people offer to join in and answer questions as well. We could probably get some people with a lot more experience than even I have, which would be really, really cool. So yeah, that's the whole idea here. I'm just going to try to answer questions. We'll see how this goes. If it's useful to people, then I'll start doing it a little more regularly. I don't know if it's going to be weekly or every other week, but we'll figure it out. Anyway, does anybody have any questions or things they'd like to ask or discuss before I? If not, I'll start going through the anonymous questions. There are 12 of them, but I'll throw it out to y'all first. Those of you in the chat, what do you want me to? What questions do you have? What do you want to know about? I'll give you the best answers I can. Oh God, Alex Ephraim just joined. There goes the chat. We're all going to be buying plugins before the end of the evening because of him. Okay, so I'm going to just sit here awkwardly in silence and see if anybody asks anything, and I'll give it a minute, and if nobody does, then what are the best plugins we bought on sale? Yeah, right. Thanks, Alex. Uh, recently, nothing. Actually, that's not true. I bought FabFilter Pro R2. I don't know if it was on sale or if it was just the discount, but I've been buying plugins a lot less lately. As you well know, Mr. Devil on my shoulder. Okay, what's the experience like working at Certain Affinity? I saw that you guys worked on Halo Infinite. Were you involved in any of the sounds in that game? Okay, so I got a couple of questions here. Let me screenshot these and open them in preview so I don't lose them as the chat goes by. We'll see if that's a good way to do it. Where'd the window go? There we go. Okay, cool. Quickly, what headphones am I using? These are Beyerdynamic DT1770 Pros. I got them because Tim Nielsen, who is a nice film sound guy and a person of whose work I'm a huge fan, would not shut up about how great they were for a while. So I tried them and I also fell in love with them. I think speakers and headphones are a very personal thing in terms of like finding the thing that works for you. But what I love about them is when I hear something in them, the thing I'm working on tends to not surprise me when I switch to my speakers or TV speakers or whatever else. So they work for me. I don't know if they'll work for you. So what is my experience like working at Certain Affinity? So one of the things that's weird about Certain Affinity is that we are a co-development studio and we can't always talk about exactly what we've done. So as much as I would like to tell you details about Certain Affinity's involvement in Halo Infinite, I cannot sit here on a live stream that's going to get posted to the internet and talk about it. We're not allowed to. So I can't answer that specific portion of the question. But what I will say is that CA is a really cool company. I've worked for a handful of places over the course of my career. The things I like about it are that we're very anti-crunch. I think I've done maybe 6 late nights in the last 4 years, which is really abnormal in our industry. And our founder, studio head, I think he's CEO as well. I hope he doesn't watch this. He's going to be mad at me for not knowing his title. Regardless, the guy at the top, Max Hoberman, is one of us. He is not a executive who went to Yale and did all of that and took over a game company. He is a designer who started at Bungie working on Halo multiplayer. He's totally one of us. He cares about us. It took me a while to start to trust it, I'll be honest, from working at other places, but he's shown me in the last 4 years that he's one of us and he's actually trying to do what's best for the people at the studio. So that's kind of what it's like working here. The audio team's really small. Because we're co-developers and we're developing an original IP as well, but we get to work on a lot of things. So I went from a decade working on shooty bang bang Call of Duty games to, in the last 4 years, working on sci-fi, fantasy, monsters, magic, robots. Like, it's been all over the place and it's been really fun. So for new sound designers starting from scratch, what would the tools, gear you'd recommend getting and learning first? I wrote a blog post about that a year or 3 ago. I'll try to find it. But what I would say is take stock of what you've got first. Don't be in a rush to go buy a bunch of stuff. Depending on what you've got, you may have a computer that'll work. Headphones are not, the ideal solution for everything, but when you're just getting started, headphones are great. If you can get a nice pair of headphones, work with that. I would definitely get a little recorder. Perhaps where's mine? I've got this little guy, the Sony M10. I've got 2 of these, actually. I bought an extra one when I found out they were going to sell out, but go get a little recorder so you can record your own source material. Zoom just announced the Essential series recorders. They've got the H1 Essential and then the H4 Essential that have 32-bit recording built in. I haven't listened to them, but they look really, really cool, and I'm probably going to order one to try it out. But get a little recorder so you can record your own source material, and then start messing around with sound. Grab little video clips. I'm a big fan of, frankly, getting on YouTube and using a tool like JDownloader to download a YouTube clip, and then throw it into your DAW and try making sounds for stuff. It's hard to recommend software and plugins. I would say don't spend a bunch of money on that. I spent way too much money, and Alex helped me spend some of that money, damn you, trying to find the magic plugins to get the right sounds. And what I've figured out is there's really not one. It's a whole lot of just using what you have. If you start with a DAW like Logic Pro on the Mac or Ableton Live, the plugins built in are really, really great. Pro Tools has really great built-in plugins. Some other DAWs, you may want to add some stuff. There's a really great thing Nick Von Cannell, I don't know if I'm saying his name correctly, audio director at Respawn, wrote up a year or 2 ago. That was a list of, like, here are all my favorite plugins for each category, my favorite paid ones and my favorite free ones. That is a phenomenal place to start. That will cover the majority of your needs really, really well. And if you're just starting out, go get all the free ones. Save yourself the money. I will, let me see if I can post NVK recommended plugin list. I'll see if I can make like an Airwiggles post and link to that, post my old article on buying gear for starters. There we go. That's my answer. I'm going to keep trying to go through the questions in the order I'm receiving them. Oh, wow. Chat is moving. Okay, I was hoping to ask how to gain opportunities in gaming audio. I've done a lot of volunteering and Full Sail and a few jams, and there is a reply. Yeah, so this is a tricky one. This is a complicated question, especially this month. Gaining opportunities in game audio, I think the big thing is to build a portfolio and try to find an opportunity to get in. Building your portfolio is really the place to start. There's a great article called The Bible of Getting a Job in Game Audio by Florian Ardeline. I'm really bad with names. Like, I know who all these people are, but I'm going to butcher people's names and I feel really bad. That covers a lot of what I'm going to say in a lot more detail, but I would say try to find like you said, game jams and things like that to work on. Go grab YouTube clips, work on them. And I think what it really comes down to is you just have to meet a lot of people, network as much as you can. I always tell people, like, when you try to network in this industry, try to make friends. Don't try to get jobs, because when you go to GDC or Game SoundCon, there's always the people that are like, hi, I want to, nice to meet you. Here's my portfolio. Here's my business card. I want a job. And that can be a little off-putting, especially if you're not hiring. It seems like the people that have been successful in getting in really focus on building a good portfolio and trying to meet a lot of people and just make friends. And eventually, if you make friends without the goal of getting work out of them, if you just make friends to make friends, the work seems to start finding you, at least in a normal situation. The last year has not been a normal situation. And if somebody asks about that, I guess I can complain about that for a little bit. What are some things you do to help support and mentor your team? My answer to that is I try to do what they need me to do, which is going to sound like kind of a vague cop-out answer, but I'm a big believer in a management philosophy called servant leadership. So my goal as the manager of an audio team is to figure out what my team needs to be successful at whatever they're doing and get that for them. And if that means I need to go knock down a wall for them, clear some blocker, get some engineer to help us fix a bug, whatever, that's really what I'm trying to do. And that varies by project. It varies by person. It's all over the map. The mentoring piece of it, I got to be honest, like the two people I have right now on our team, one kind of gets some mentorship, I think, through all of us just sharing knowledge. One is kind of blazing his own trail and really, really experienced. And yeah, I'm not really mentoring him, to be honest. He's, if anything, more mentoring me. I'm learning stuff from him all the time, which is fantastic. But again, I think it comes down to just being what your team needs, what each individual person on your team needs, and figuring out how to provide that for them in the form of support and mentorship. We share knowledge like I think most audio teams do. We compare notes on new things we figured out, talks we watched. I'm always saying, hey, I read this conversation on the audio Discord or on Game Audio Slack or whatever, and we're just kind of sharing knowledge constantly. Michael Johnson asks, on the topic of Halo and Call of Duty, how would you approach a remastered sound? Recreating a sound people are familiar with, but upgrading the quality. I actually have firsthand experience with this. The audio team at Raven was responsible for the remaster of Modern Warfare 1, which was the original Modern Warfare 1, not the 2017, 2019 Modern Warfare 1. I can't remember anymore. The Modern Warfare 1, not Modern Warfare 1 redone. That was weird. We did not have a lot of time. We ended up reusing a lot of assets from other games, other COD games, to help us. But the guns, I think, were the biggest. I can think of two examples. Guns were a big sticking point. And then there was one kind of designy thing that I thought was a really interesting example of how we approached it. So the gun example, we initially said, hey, let's make the guns sound really modern. Let's just kind of bring them up to the modern day COD sound. And the guy who did the majority of the sound design for the guns, I did a few, but most of them were done by a guy named Andy, who was on the Raven audio team. Really, really cool guy. Really great sound designer. And he on the bulk of them, and I on the few that I did, we kind of did this really modern, punchy sound, and we didn't really think too much about paying much homage to the originals. Like, our whole thought was like, how do we bring this game into the modern day and make it sound like a modern game? And what we found was a lot of people were really upset when they heard of this. I think there was a beta test or some gameplay footage that went out officially or something. People got really upset and it caused this big freak out. So what we ended up doing is we went back, we took the original assets from the first game, we used them as layers, and then we tried to build around the character of those guns by adding things to augment them, to increase the low end punch, to increase the mechanics, whatever. But we tried to make sure that we preserved that original character of the gun that made people so I guess nostalgic for the original. And I would say the lesson I learned there was that when you approach a remaster or a remake, or even if you're working on like a new game and a very established IP, you should, rather than just trying to do what sounds modern and cool, try to make it sound like what people remember it sounding like, even if it's not exactly what it did sound like, if that makes sense. Because if you go back and listen, no disrespect to the original Modern Warfare, there was some really great sound design, but if you sound like it, it sounds like an Xbox 360 game. And we were doing this on the PS4 and Xbox One. We had a lot more resources, so we just, in the second attempt, we tried to apply those resources and do as much as we could to improve it while still maintaining that original vision. Another really interesting example from that project was if you go prone and start crawling around on a multiplayer map. In the original Modern Warfare 1, there is no sound. Like, your character is silent. And I don't know if this was an issue if they ran out of resources or if it was a bug that they never fixed. I don't know why that happened, but that came up on the remaster. It got bugged. And then I want to say we went and put in a sound, and then somebody else bugged it and said, hey, in the original game, there was no sound for crawling. Now there's sound for crawling. That turned into this huge discussion about the gameplay implications, because that could give away a person's location if somebody near them heard them crawling. So that was another case where we had to really think about the fact that we were making a remaster versus making a new game. And in that case, we ended up shivving it without crawling sounds. We left it completely silent. Yeah, from a presentation perspective, it seems a little weird that it doesn't make sound, but it was true to the gameplay of the original. Sorry, it was a long answer, but that's kind of my attitude about it. Like I said, just try to be true to what the original was and bring it into the modern era. What qualities would your dream sound designer, teammate, underling, minion possess? From Alex Ephraim. Quality number one would be that they don't try to sell me plugins I don't need. Really, wow, I'm like 10 minutes behind on chat already. This is scary. I got to catch up. I think the requirements at CA are going to be different than any other studio. And not that we're unique, just I think each studio is going to have their own requirements. But for us, we really like people that are, based on the kind of work we do and the way our work is divided up, we like people that are pretty independent, that are self-starters, can kind of get to work on their own and not be told what to do a lot of the time. Ego is a big one. We want people that have very little ego, that are very into getting constructive feedback about their work, that are willing to give feedback. People that are going to be professional. We do a lot of communication with client studios, and some of our people end up being embedded with other teams. So we want somebody that we can trust to go interact with a client's team and represent us well and be professional about it. But finally, I don't know. I want to work with somebody who's cool, who's fun to be around, who's enthusiastic about what we do, who's driven to learn more about it. I mean, I think most people would agree with that. You kind of want to work with people you like spending time with, because we end up spending a lot of time together working on projects together. I think somebody answered the question. Yes, Nick Von Cannell, the Respawn Audio person. Let me scroll down. What were some of the mistakes you made at the start of your career that you advise those starting out to avoid? Alex again. A few. I made a lot of mistakes. God, I still make mistakes. Some of the biggest ones I made were buying way more plugins and way more tools than I needed. And I'm not just saying that because Alex asked that. It's the truth. Like, I've got a spreadsheet of every plugin I've ever bought. I've spent about $65,000 on software over the course of my life. I don't use very much of that anymore. It was a tremendous waste of money. And that is 18 years worth of purchases, 19 years. So it's not like I did that overnight, but I spent too much time chasing tools, trying to find the answer for how to make things. And what I really needed to do was sit down and spend time making sounds with the tools that I had and figure it out. That's a big, big thing. There is no, in my opinion, there's no shortcut for just doing the work and figuring out how to make the sounds you want to hear. And what'll happen is when you start or you're early in your career, you will make things and they will not make you happy. I mean, who am I kidding? The stuff I do now, I'm not happy with, but I was really unhappy with my stuff back then. But the fact that you can hear the difference, I'm kind of riffing on an Ira Glass quote on creativity here. The fact that you can hear the difference is important, but there's no plugin that's really going to close that gap for you. There are some techniques that will help close that gap for you. And if you can find the right mentors and learn them, that will help you. And maybe I can answer some questions about some of those specific things, although most of my answers are going to be things I learned from somebody else. But there's really no excuse. There's really no alternative other than just do the work. So that was a big one. Another big one was I got promoted to a management role 5 years into my career, and I got so caught up in the management and inter-studio communication and intra-studio communication and all that stuff that I didn't focus enough on being a sound designer. And that was also a really big mistake, in my opinion. I wish I had not done that and just focused on getting better at my craft. I've made up for a lot of lost ground in recent years, a lot of lost time in recent years, which I think is great. But yeah, those are some of the big ones. I feel like a mistake I see others make a lot that I didn't make because I had a father and a mother who both spent a lot of their life in sales, and they kind of warned me against it, was be nice to everyone. Don't be a jerk, because especially in a small industry, that stuff will come back to haunt you. So I've seen other people kind of knock people around and be rude and be disrespectful towards people. I don't feel like I've really had that problem, but I had parents warning me against that early on in my life. Any favorite sound design tips and tricks that you think more people should use? The more niche, the better. Oh gosh, that's such a huge question. You'd have to ask something more specific for me to give you like specific sound design tips and tricks. But one tip I think is worth mentioning is whatever tools you have, really go, at least this works for me, really go deep and learn them. I had a bit of a change of approach towards reverb a couple years ago. A mentor of mine suggested I try a reverb that he uses for mixing. And using this as an example, I read the manual cover to cover. I spent, I think, a day and a half, maybe 2 days, just feeding sounds through it and playing with the settings and really figuring out exactly what it could do. And that created what I felt was a night and day difference in the quality of the reverbs I use when mixing. So there's one tip I would say is read the manual of your plugins, watch tutorial videos, really get deep in what they can do. Let me see. Somebody replied to the link. Thank you, Martin, for answering some of these questions. How does the career path or getting your foot in the door differ from music producers, composers versus sound designers? I'm extremely proficient at music production and composition and have a large portfolio, and that would be my main interest. Okay. It's very different, in my opinion. And I can't speak a lot to how people do this in music and composing. I would say, like, I know a little bit about how those work. With music producers, it seems to be a lot of networking and a lot of working on music projects with whatever artists you can get connected with. With composers, it seems like people, again, network a lot, but they focus, instead of on networking with other game sound professionals, they're more focused on audio directors, game directors, producers, people that might actually hire them. And then obviously they try to work on whatever games they can, indie games, game jams, whatever. I don't know if doing redesign work the way a lot of us sound designers do is very useful for composers. I just don't know enough about that. The career path for a sound designer, at least it feels like right now in games, is to become a power user of your DAW and your selected tools, learn Wise or Fmod, combined with Unreal or Unity, kind of learn the flow of getting your sounds hooked up in the game, work on whatever portfolio pieces you can, even if you have to redesign them. Working on game jams or indie projects is a great way to do it. But mostly, like, everything I'm saying is in that article I mentioned, the Bible of Getting a Job in Game Audio by Florian Ardelin. Go read that. He goes into way more detail on everything I'm saying right now. What are my top 3 recommended books? I skimmed your game audio resources v3 doc. Any updates since 2021? I'm struggling actually to remember what was in that doc. Let me go see if I've got a link to that still. I should. Maybe not. Oh my gosh. I don't remember where my... Okay, I don't know where that doc is. Let me see. Just off the top of my head, it's not a book, but The Bible of Getting a Job in Game Audio by Florian Arlene's a great one. I'm a real big fan of Michel Chion's Sound Vision. It's more film based, but it kind of opened my mind when I was younger to some of the concepts of like juxtaposition of sound. Tomlinson Hallman, I'm trying to remember which book it was, but I'm a person that needs frameworks to think about things. I know some sound designers who are very abstract and just kind of follow their heart, and I love those people. I'm not like that. I need kind of semi-academic frameworks around the way I think. And Tomlinson Hallman and his, I think they're called Styles of Sound. That stuff really kind of, I guess, created some order to the chaos in my brain of what a sound designer does for media. Rob Bridget's stuff is really, really good. I don't know. I'm struggling to remember what else is in that doc, but there's a few ones. Oh boy. Long question from Matthew. This is a long one and a subjective question to boot. Context and intent counts for something, but here we go. In your experience and on average, how much time gets dedicated to the final mix and implementation tweaks? I asked because of my extensive searches for linear gameplay redesigns for random demo reels, finding that lots of mixes are really inconsistent across the board. I'm just going to quickly read the rest of this. The answer is there's never enough time. Each team handles this differently. And there is no one answer. So if you were to talk to some Sony folks, and I've talked to a couple of Sony folks and I've watched some of their Game Sound Con talks and stuff, they would tell you that they get some time at the end, but probably not as much time as they want. I know a lot of places where they just don't get time at the end at all. The thing that has worked for me, you know, and I'm not saying it's perfect, it's just what has kind of worked for me, is to get the mix established as early as possible. Like as soon as you have not even an official vertical slice, but as soon as you have enough of a slice of gameplay, I always use the term beautiful corner, which the artists seem to use a lot. And the idea of a beautiful corner in art, I guess I'm diverting slightly, but the idea of a beautiful corner in art in a game is that if you go to this one spot in a map and interact with this one character, use this one item or this one weapon, that looks like the finished game. Like only in that one spot. I try to think about mixing the game in the same way. So I will, on a first-person shooter, say, okay, let's get one weapon, one sidearm, one grenade, one enemy, and one room sounding like the final game should sound. And then you use that as kind of the reference point for mixing the rest of the game. And the idea is, once you establish that, you go mix everything else you've got in the game to match that. If you make any changes, then you go back and make those changes. But as you then put sounds into the game, continuing through production, you try to maintain that mix and preserve it as much as you can, so that when you get to whatever final mix time you do have in the end, you don't have this mountain of problems to fix. You've hopefully got something that's pretty well refined, and you can go in and just kind of polish things and clean them up a bit. That is my approach. There was a fantastic talk by... who was it? It was Rob Bridget and somebody else from Sony. And I can't remember whether it was a Game Sound Con talk or a GDC talk, but it was Rob Bridget and Loic Coutier, I think, talking about the mix of Returnal, where they kind of talked about their approach to it and what went well for them and what their ideal was going into the future. That talk is very worthwhile watching. Because they talk even down to the point of documenting loudness standards for different classes of sounds. They really get into the weeds on how they achieve the mix of that game and where they want to try to improve in the future. That one's really worth watching to get a good look at how somebody has done this. But those are my thoughts. scrolling down a little bit more. If you have a favorite game that inspires you, what will it be? Quickly, Metal Gear on the NES when I was 8 years old was the game that made me say, hey, somebody makes the sounds for these games. I must have a Konami thing because I really, really loved Silent Hill 1 and 2. I really loved Metal Gear Solid. Those games really kind of pulled me in terms of more modern stuff, I'm a huge fan of the work that the PlayStation teams do. I think their games sound really, really outstanding. I'm a big fan of Martin Stieg Anderson. Hopefully he's not on here hearing me fanboy about him. But I love the games he works on. There's a lot of great stuff out there, but, you know, Inside and Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart, those are some of the games that have really kind of blown me away in recent years. Let me see here. I know you have a busy schedule, but do you see doing another sound design tutorial like the one you did the pro sound effects in the near future? I really want to do more of those, but I hate seeing myself on camera. And I'm really, really busy. So those two things have conspired to keep me from doing it. I should do it again. The other thing, and I'm saying this because it's the truth. I'm not saying this fishing for compliments. I have got like crippling imposter syndrome and self-doubt. So every time I talk about how I do what I do, all that goes through my head is, oh, I learned this from other people. None of this is original. None of this is my own. And that, it almost makes me kind of uncomfortable talking about that stuff because I feel like I'm giving away other people's secrets. And I feel like everything I am is just the result of people that came before me and taught me things. But that's also probably kind of stupid, and I should probably do it. So I don't know. Maybe I'd like to, but we'll see. Favorite tool for pitch shifting? Absolute favorite is Pitch in Time Pro. And I love it enough that even though I'm a Reaper user, I will fire up Pro Tools to do that on like animal vocals and stuff where I really, really don't want to mess anything up. But Elastic, the algorithm that's built into Reaper is also really, really good. Let's see. Best tips, resources for learning Fmod. I see somebody replied, Alessandro Fama's blog is tops when it comes to simple Fmod. Great. I've got nothing on learn Fmod, so that's awesome. Do you have a favorite Tone Benders episode? Yes, I do actually have a favorite Tone Benders episode, and that is the interview with Gary Bourgeois where he goes into his mixing template and he talks in tremendous detail about how he mixes films. I learned so much from that. I think I listened to that thing 5 times. I downloaded the screenshots. I took tons of notes. And then I started figuring out how to apply the things I was hearing in that to a game mix. That episode blew my mind. And I keep hoping somebody else will do another episode like that. Somebody asked, did I say Michelle Chion? Yes, I did. And Nathan Moody responded. Okay. Awesome. Do you find yourself recording or using synths more in your workflow? I recommend visiting the Moog Museum in Asheville, North Carolina. They have free factory tours. I do sometimes. Like, it's really easy to do that in sci-fi stuff, less so in more natural stuff. One of my favorite synths is back here, and you can't see it because it's dark, but it's the Korg Op 6. There's a plug-in version. They didn't have the plug-in when I bought it. But it's a really accessible, easy to use FM synth, and I like generating like metallic timbres and stuff like that. But sometimes it just depends. It really depends on the project and if I've got need for it. I would be remiss if I didn't mention Pigments because Alex is telling everybody he knows about it, including me, and he's kind of gotten me to start playing with that plugin more. It's really, really powerful. And Radium, which is more of a sampler, but I use Radium in SoundMiner all the time. It's not really a synth, it's a sampler, but so much of what I do is built in Radium. That came into my life post-Activision, like around the time I started at Certain Affinity, and it has completely changed how I work. Do you have any non-audio related hobbies, activities that you think improve your sound work? I don't know if they improve my sound work. I mean, maybe they improve my sound work in the sense that they make me think about things other than sound. But I like to cook a lot. And it's funny because I tend to think about sound design and effects processing, especially as cooking. And that's a common analogy, but I like to cook. I like to watch nerdy films, as I call them, because my family are like, "Why are you watching a black and white movie?" Because we're 8 years old, and it's actually funny. My daughter asked me the other day if movies were black and white when I was a kid in the '80s, and I feel so fucking old. I like nerdy old movies. I play a lot of retro games. I'm super down the rabbit hole on things like the Mister and the Analog Pocket. FPGA is awesome. I like to read. I like to go for walks. I'm trying to lose weight, which is, walking has been helpful for that. I think it's important to do other things and get other experiences in life. And I think it's good to do things that are, it's weird. I feel like to do this job successfully, you have to be kind of obsessed with audio, but I think you also have to force yourself to take breaks and do things where you don't think about audio for a while. And those are some of the ways I do that. Scott VR asked, when using library sounds, do you have a minimum amount of layers or tweaks you try to do before feeling like it's your own sound? No. For me, there's a phrase that a friend and mentor of mine, Mr. Dave Farmer, likes to use called sticking to the screen. For me, I will do as little as possible to get a sound to stick to the screen. So I don't even think about it in terms of I have to make a sound my own or I have to process it a certain amount. My goal is to find the right sound for the context I'm working on, whether it's a pull with a couple of tiny tweaks or building a complicated sampler patch in radium or building some sort of madness out of arteria pigments. For me, it's all about what does it take to get the sound that I need the player to hear it in any particular circumstance. So no, there's no minimum layer tweaks. I will say there is a maximum amount of layers and tweaks. And it's not a hard number, but I will, as I'm working, if I find that the stack of sounds is getting really big, I will start going through and muting elements to see what's actually contributing and helping and what's not. I like to jokingly call it playing accordion because the number of tracks gets bigger and then I trim it down and then it gets bigger again and it kind of keeps going back and forth. I'm a big fan of trying to get as much done with as few layers as I can because I feel like it forces me to pick better sounds and keep the composite cleaner. But sometimes you have to stack a bunch of stuff up. I don't know. Tips for breaking down the elements of a sound to reverse engineer a sound that you love. I'm actually not great at that. I'm normally, when I'm trying to dissect stuff, I normally fall back to asking other people because I feel like I get a little too caught up in hearing the sound as an experience and I have trouble dissecting it when it's not mine. Whereas when I listen to my own sounds, it's like I can hear every little piece and it all sticks out like sore thumbs to me. But slow it down, try slowing it down, try reversing it, try putting filters on and like listening to the high end in isolation, the low end in isolation, the bandpass in isolation. Those are some of the things that can be helpful. Looping segments of it in time. You'll find that some sound designers, actually a lot of sound designers, like to think carefully about how they sequence stuff. I mentioned Farmer earlier, and some of the films he's done, his creature sounds, if you listen carefully, he actually doesn't stack much stuff. It's more about how he sequences this alligator breath into this tiger roar into this dog tooth snap. And if you go start splitting them up and listening to them, you'll start to hear where the boundaries are between them. Those are some ways to try to do it, but like I said, I'm not great. What other audio avenues have influenced your work the most? I think it's a lot of the obvious stuff. Great sounding video games, great sounding films. I'm a big David Lynch fan. I didn't mention that earlier in terms of stuff that's inspired my work. Speaking of things I saw when I was young, I saw Blue Velvet when I was like 7 or 8 years old. I was way too young to watch that movie. My mom kept buying stacks of VHS tapes from the nearby home video or video rental store, which kids probably don't even know what that is these days. But she would bring home these stacks of videos, and I was, I guess, what we called the latchkey kid back then. I don't know if they still exist, but basically I was home a lot in the evenings after school with no parents. So I would just watch all these movies, and some of them were definitely not stuff a little kid should be watching, but Blue Velvet kind of blew my mind as a 7 or 8 year old, and I've since been a big fan of a lot of David Lynch's works. Alan Splett, who worked on a number of his films, was a huge influence on me. And I think I liked those because I don't want to say it was on the nose because it fits so well, but some of the sound choices in his films are so abstract, yet they still work so perfectly. And there's so much very clear symbolism, like the use of electrical sounds to indicate supernatural things happening. Things like that were a big influence on me. Is there any concern in the industry related to AI similar to how it's impacting the digital art industry? Oh my God, that's such a massive question. We could talk for hours about that. I think everybody has different opinions on that. My opinion is very much I don't know. I'm anxious and I'll see. I think my general attitude is I'm a little cynical towards most business leaders in our industry, and I suspect that if they can get sound for free without paying people like us to make it, they'll do it. So my worry is, will AI get good enough to, not good enough to necessarily replace us one-to-one, but will it get good enough that people don't care so much? And we'll see. I don't know. I've heard lots of arguments. The early attempts I've heard at AI generated sound effects have been laughably bad, but is it going to improve really quickly? I don't know. We'll see. I wish I had a good answer, but I think a lot of us just don't know. I feel like I'm blazing through questions, but I'm trying to get through as many of them as I can. Is there a standard DAW you recommend using for game sound design? I worked with Pro Tools for a while, but friends recommended me Reaper. No. If you're working, for game sound design, no. I would say use what you have access to. I would actually recommend against Pro Tools, not because Pro Tools is bad, but it just tends to be more expensive. You could get Ableton Live, or you could get Logic Pro if you're on a Mac for a lot cheaper and get a lot of great built-in plugins. Most game audio teams that I know of don't really care what DAW you use. So it's less important what DAW you use. It's more important that you get good enough with one that you can focus on being creative and not have to worry about your tool getting in your way, if that makes sense. So again, the only recommendation against Pro Tools would be more of a don't spend a ton of money on your DAW. If you're going to try to go into film or TV sound, learn Pro Tools. Like, that's still so widely used. What games impressed you on a technical level? Yeah, It Takes Two. I hate split screen, man. Split screen is hard. At least the times I've tried to do it, it was not easy to make it sound good. I loved what they did with it. Games that impressed me on a technical level, that's a recent example. Wasn't the best sounding game I heard last year, but I heard a game called Firewall Ultra that was a VR game that had really impressive propagation and reverb use. That one really kind of blew my mind in terms of how accurate it sounded. There was a multiplayer map, or maybe it was a single player map. I don't remember. It was a shooter. It was a first person shooter in VR. There was a map where it was very dark and you couldn't hear anything, but you could tell by listening where enemies are and what they were doing. They did a really good job of making that sound really, really accurate. So that one kind of blew my mind recently. Yes, Nathan, I listened to that episode this morning, which is why I thought of that. Why I thought of that example from Dave. I love that dude. He's so wonderful. And that podcast was a lot of fun. I'm not even super into Lord of the Rings, but I'm a big fan of all the people that worked on it. Here's a controversial one. Should new sound designers work for free when trying to break into the industry? Here's my take on that. I think it depends on your life situation, whether you can afford to work for free. But I think it also depends on whether other people in the project are getting paid. I would advise you, don't work for free on a project where other people are getting paid if you can help it. Go try to find games that are mods or indie projects where everybody's chipping in, or game jams, whatever. Try to get paid something if you're going to work on a project. And the other bit of advice I would give to that is, if you do a project and they want to pay you less than you feel you're worth, and setting rates is a difficult setting rates is a very difficult conversation. But if you work on a project where you have to basically compromise your rate to get the project, but you want it for the experience, don't give them a cheaper rate. Give them your full rate and then discount it. Put it on the invoice so that you're building it into their mind that, hey, I'm worth X. You're getting me for a discount because I want to work on this project, but I'm still worth X. Make it very clear. But yeah, it's, again, the whether to work for free thing, it's hard and it's a really personal decision, but I would try to get something, whether it's a little bit of money or a barter of services or something, or again, just try to work on a project where that people aren't getting paid. What is your favorite game of all time and why is it Call of Duty? It is absolutely not Call of Duty. And I have no like ill will towards Call of Duty. I was never a big first person shooter person, and it's really strange that I've worked on so many of them over the years. I used to tell people, and I guess I still kind of do, but it's less accurate now. I used to tell people I'm a David Lynch fan working on Michael Bay films. You know, I play a lot of JRPGs. I play a lot of adventure games. I play a lot of indies. That is kind of where my heart is as a gamer. I'd love to work on one of those games someday, maybe. But no, it's not Call of Duty. I don't know. If I had to pick an absolute favorite, I always rotate to the same usual suspects. Red Dead Redemption 1, Silent Hill 2, Metal Gear Solid 1, Eternal Darkness is another really big favorite. Do I know how the Needler sound in Halo is made? No, I do not. I would go ask Jay Wineland on that one. He'd probably tell you. Maybe I can, if people really like this and it's proving to be useful, maybe I can get Jay to come on and maybe he knows because he was around back then. I'd love to have Jay on. I'd love to ask him a bunch of questions too. Implementation related question. How granular do you get when you're separating gun sounds for export? For example, separating mechanic click sound to fade in for low ammo. And how do you like to handle spatial reverb for gun tails? Man, okay. A lot of questions there. So general above guns, like general attitude for implementing sounds is I want to keep the implementation as simple as possible and still get the job done. Certainly when I was early in my career, I wanted to build these super complex systems and then you'd listen to them and be like, okay, it doesn't sound any better than just putting the sound in. Yay for me for making it super complicated, but it was a waste of effort. I always try to keep things as simple as I can. General approach to guns is get a sub layer, a dedicated LFE layer if you're mixing in 5.1 or Atmos, a body of the sound, which is above the sub and the LFE, a mechanical layer, and a tail. So I usually go for roughly 5 layers. And I do that so that I can do a couple of, 6, and a transient. I will keep the initial transient of the sound separate from the rest of it. And I do that for a couple of reasons. One, I want to be able to have a little bit of independent mix control in the game engine. Two, I want to be able to cycle those elements randomly individually, which gives me more variety in the shots. Guns are already not a super, like if you go hear somebody shoot 10 shots of a gun in real life, it's not super varied in general. So that gives you a little more variety. 3, you can do clever things like having the transient of the gunshot duck the mix a bit harder than everything else. Separating out tails, and how do you like to handle spatial reverb for gun tails in general? I really like to author them. So I will author them through the use of reverbs and impulse responses, or sometimes I'll just go swipe tails from libraries and then modify them and hype them up. I mentioned Andy at Raven a long time, earlier. One of the tricks I learned from him was taking thunder and ricochets and other things and kind of filtering them and then crossfading them in over the life of a gunshot tail. You start doing that, especially with like sniper rifles, it gets really fun. But I tend to like to author tails as much as I can. So you can't author them for every single environment in your game, but if you can do like a couple of indoor variants for small, medium, and larger indoor spaces, and then a couple of outdoor variants, that seems to work really well. I haven't heard no disrespect to the people who wrote the algorithms for Wise and other things, but I've yet to fall in love with an in-game reverb. I tend to use a lot of impulse responses these days, and I'm really grateful we can, and I just shoot IRs through plugins to make reverbs and stuff. But for gun tales, I don't even love using reverbs if I can help it. I'd much rather get real recordings. Let's see. Do you think that the oscillator, aka the bleep sound, is funny? I use it a lot. It can be if you're using it for the right thing. I will say one of my favorite things on YouTube is just bleeping bad words made me think there's a YouTube chef. I watch a lot of YouTube chefs in my spare time because I like to cook, so I'm looking for recipes. There's this guy named Matty Matheson who does YouTube videos about cooking, and he curses a lot, and the bleeps are always mistimed, so the word still gets through, and then you hear the bleep, or the bleep will come early. It just makes me laugh. I don't know why I thought of that. Giga Chad game selection. What percentage of your sounds are from libraries, and how much do you prefer to record yourself? So I don't know if I could put a percentage on it. I will say most of the source material I use comes from libraries because I have spent most of my career at co-dev studios, like even at Raven. I know they lead on Warzone now, but at the time we were generally helping other studios ship their games. We didn't get to go on a lot of recording sessions. We didn't get a lot of time to go record our own material. At CA, where they keep us fairly busy. So I tend to pull a lot from libraries, but I tend to manipulate it. And it's not, again, like I said earlier, it's not about manipulating sounds for the sake of manipulating them. It's often direct pulls don't fit quite right, and you have to do something to them to make them fit. But I'd say probably 70% of the source material I use comes from libraries, and the rest comes from recordings, and it's really context dependent. Like I worked on Hogwarts Legacy, and I did a bunch of these little animations of kids at Zonko's joke shop, or was it Zonko's shop or the candy shop? I don't remember, but they were I think it was the candy shop, because they were eating things that were causing reactions, like doing animal growls. And if you find the kid who takes the belch powder and burps, that's my son Milo. But for a lot of those things, like especially Foley-like sounds, I tend to just grab a mic in my room and record it. I record things whenever I get the opportunity to and throw them in the library, but I do pull a lot of stuff from libraries and then manipulate it. When and how do you use scripting in your work? How do you recommend getting started with scripting and programming? Alex, with a real question, not just torturing me. So I use it a lot because I'm a big believer that getting a big part of the creative process of being a game sound designer is not just the sounds you make, but how you implement them and how they respond to player input. So I use it a lot. Most things I work on have some amount of blueprint work that goes with them. As far as getting into it, learning, there's a really great course on Udemy, I think, called Ultimate Blueprint for Unreal Engine 4, I think. That course is a really great way to do it. Another way to kind of learn the basics of scripting would be to start with either C# and Unity, or start with Python and try to build some stuff. If you want to specifically do a game application, try Blueprint. I should probably drink some water. I'm dying here. But I would say, the best thing to get your head around with scripting and programming is to get your head around how functions work, how variables work, how casting works, how to do a lot of that stuff. There was this thing, and if Caleb's still here, he can certainly speak to this. The Call of Duty engine was some crusty old tech. It had some modern additions, but I believe the lineage of it went back to Quake 3, the GPL release from id Software way back when. So we were writing a lot of stuff in a scripting language that I think was descended from QuakeScript, and it was kind of a C-like programming language. So that forced a lot of us who worked on the Call of Duty games to get our head around a basic level of programming. Now, it wasn't really complicated object-oriented programming, but it at least made us decent scripters. Anyway, all that is to say that doing some projects, I think, is a good way to get there, even if they're small projects. So either go build a little game in Unreal, build a little game in Unity, and just start getting into the weeds of the scripting, or blueprinting, which is blueprinting is basically Unreal's version of scripting. Nice. Caleb says he went digging for Quake 3 code once and found a bit still left. Yeah, I believe it. I remember one day at Raven, somebody sent an email out because they found a comment that Carmack had left somewhere in some bit of code. I don't even remember what it was, but it was really funny. It was something like, nobody should ever do this way. I can't believe I did this. I'll come back and fix this. And then obviously he never did because it was still there freaking 20 years later. Anyway, yeah, just do something like Python or Blueprint or Unity and just try to script and practice with that. Let's see, next question. I see a lot of music gear behind you. Do you like to create music as well, or is it mainly used for sound design purposes? I used to be in a Spanish industrial band from Texas. And I've often had an obsession with synths. I kind of started, before I knew how to get into game sound, I was playing with synths and trying to recreate a lot of the music I liked when I was a kid. Music's a hobby. I haven't released anything in like 20 something years, and the stuff I've released is not very good. I sometimes use them for sound design purposes, but honestly, most of my synths the way my synths get mostly used is setting up a drum loop and jamming with my kids and having fun. It's a nerdy hobby. I could function with soft synths and I'd be fine. Recommendations for free paid sound libraries. Will H is asking about that. There's a great article written by Andrew Scott, who's an Austin person, on how to build a sound effects library for free. I think that's in that resources doc that I think it's linked from that somebody shared earlier in the link. Sorry, I'm just seeing what Caleb wrote. Script is quite similar to C#. Yep, I think starting there with Unity is great. I agree. By the way, Caleb, for those of you who don't know Caleb is extremely sharp technically, stronger than even I am. So I would definitely take his advice. And yeah, meta sounds and blueprints I agree. Yeah, I think there's a link to that, but if not, just go search for Andrew Scott, how to build a free sound effects library. There's a bunch of great stuff there. As far as paid ones, I don't want to encourage you to go out and spend money. And I think it's all very project dependent, but some of my favorites in terms of libraries are, I really like Frank Bree, the recordist. I like his stuff. I'm a big fan of Penguin Grenade, which is, oh my God, I know his name. He used to work with us on Call of Duty. Penguin Grenade. I am so tired. I can't remember the dude's name, and it's going to jump to my head, and I'm going to be really mad and embarrassed that I can't remember his name right now. Paul Stoughton, thank you. Yes, Paul's libraries are freaking fantastic. Oh, God, I hope he doesn't see this because I feel like an asshole now. Paul is great. Geez, let me just open SoundMiner and see. I didn't get a lot of sleep last night. That's why I'm struggling to think. But yeah, the Recordist and Penguin Grenade are two favorites. Sorry, I'm waiting for SoundMiner to load. And then I will look. Of course you do, Alex. You're going to go like snip a clip of this and show it to him and be like, look, Kilborn forgot your name. Matthias Salato has some fantastic libraries, especially his animal hyperrealism libraries. If you find yourself working on creature stuff, those are really, really cool. The Boom stuff, the source material it's got kind of a sound, but it's really useful for games. I wouldn't use it as my only thing, but it's really, really good. What else do I like? Hiss and Aurora has some really great libraries. That's, again, I'm forgetting the name. A gentleman who lives in New Zealand. I feel like a jerk now. Those are some of my favorites. Rabbit Ears Audio, Michael Raphael, those are really great. I don't know him personally, but I'll introduce myself in this manner. Thanks. Tim Preble, yes. Damn it. Oh, crap. Okay, next question. How do you approach designing vehicle sounds for games? Really depends on whether it's sci-fi or real world. Real world, I got to work on a couple of the Forza games, and I worked on Project Gotham Racing 4. It was a very tedious process of taking recordings of real-life cars that had been recorded on a dynamometer, getting steady RPM cycles, editing those until they were loopable and then building a pitchable interactive vehicle. The beauty of sci-fi vehicles is it's kind of the same technique. It seems like looping stuff and then pitch modulating it works really well, but you can use whatever you want. There's a really cool, if you're looking for ideas for a place to start, there's a cool video from a guy named Thomas Boykin where he builds a sci-fi vehicle and battery using a kick drum, I think. And I mean, the initial results aren't great. I would spend a lot more time on it. And I think he even says the same thing. He would spend a lot more time on it. But that kind of gives you the theory of like loop some sounds that are kind of stacked together, pitch modulate them, and try to create, the kind of ramps that feel right for the sort of vehicle you're going for. And then for real stuff, it's really about getting good recordings of real cars. What microphone or field recorder do you use for most of your recorded sounds? The M10 is the handy one. I'm a big fan of Sheps. I've got a little Sheps MS setup that I love, but if you're early in your career, don't go run out and buy those. They're crazy expensive. Just get a little recorder. The best microphone is the one you've got with you. Just record stuff. And the microphones are getting so good these days, even these little portable ones. Can someone get into game music without having to be an expert at Wise Fmod game engine middleware? Caleb answered that in chat, and his answer was fantastic. So I got nothing to add. Thank you, Caleb. You are awesome, sir. Thank you so much for the advice and tips. Cool. Thank you for coming, Miguel. That was cool. All right. I think I'm caught up. I think I've answered all the questions. I feel bad not answering any of the questions from the thing, but I will. A lot of them are kind of big. You know what? I'll answer one, and then I will make a little time at the beginning next time I do this, if we do this again, where I'll answer more of them. One of the questions that I think is worth asking: what sort of non-audio tools should a junior sound designer spend more time with than they might realize, and what are they used for? Learn how to use a spreadsheet and a word processor. And it sounds simple, but we spend so much of our lives in either Excel and Word or Google Sheets and Google Docs. Like, I mean, it's CA, we're all Google Suite, but learn one of those, learn how to use them. That stuff is tremendously useful. Source control. If you can get your head around how Perforce works, if you can learn how to check things in, check things out, check things in, merge stuff, roll stuff back, like all those, that's all like basic game dev 101 stuff that's not really audio specific, but it's tremendously useful, and we do it every single day. And it's not really a tool so much as a process or a way of thinking, but I would really focus on learning time management skills, learn how to manage your own work and build your own schedule. Because even though we have a calendar that dictates all the meetings we're going to, that we've been invited to, within the gaps in our schedule where we're actually building sounds, we have to manage our own time pretty effectively. We have to figure out how long it takes us to do certain things. We come upon gaps where we're like, hey, I've got 30 or 45 minutes before my next meeting. Which of my tasks can I get done in that window of time? So time management's a really big one. And then, yeah, I think, Martin, I think you're right. I think at the beginning of the next one, I'm going to do just a little bit at the beginning where I go through some of the anonymous questions. Anyway, I'm going to wrap this up, but if you think this was useful, let me know. I don't know I hope it is. I hope this helped. I'll go post a request for thoughts on Airwiggles about it, but let me know what y'all think. If you think this would be worth doing again, then I will try to do this more often, either every week or every other week. And I would, if people do find it interesting, I'd love to do it more, especially because I'd like to get people like Caleb and others in and get them to answer some questions, and I want to ask them questions too. So yeah, let me know what you think. Thank you all for coming out. I hope this was helpful, and I hope you all have a great week or two until we do this again. See y'all. Good night.